10 years ago, I used to run an applicant tracking system, and it was before Google tried and failed their own applicant tracking system, which was called Google Hire. But what strikes me the most is how little has changed with regards to how job descriptions are handled for job interviews. So I'm going to present you a few reasons to understand why you should be skeptical about the information presented in the job description, and why having an approach of trying to find out as much as possible about what they're actually looking for will significantly impact the outcome of your job interview. So the first thing you should understand about these job descriptions is their primary goal is to attract candidates. They're also called a marketing manifesto. So you can expect the difference between a marketing manifesto and an accurate description of the ideal candidate. There's a big difference between the two. So this would be one reason you should understand where they come from. Another important thing you should understand about these job interviews is that any role with high-performing companies will be defined by a set of core competencies. Let's say 3 core competencies, which will define the ideal candidate. Those key competencies will never, ever get shared in the actual job description, right? So remember, the job description's purpose is rather a marketing manifesto than a support document for the candidate during these job interviews. The next point I'd like to share with you, and this goes back to my experience running an applicant tracking system where I closely managed and foresaw how upwards of 200 hiring managers were using these job descriptions, is that a job description is rarely a new one. Building an entirely new job description is serious business, is a lot of investment, and very few companies will do so. 95% or 98%, I would even dare to say, of these job descriptions are just a clone of a job description that used to work in the past for maybe a similar, maybe a different type of role, which would maybe they add a few sentences in there to make it look like a new one, right? So understand that the job descriptions go backwards. So nobody's going to invest a ton of resources to write new job descriptions. So another example, another worrying trend these days is companies such as Meta or Salesforce are actually trialing AI job descriptions. It's a terrible sign, but at least, it's only in isolated scenarios, and it's only, for companies that are not doing that well these days. NVIDIA, Google, Amazon, and the likes are not, joining these AI job descriptions trend, right? Now, what can you do about this? And what is some actionable advice for you to consider during these job interviews? Well, the first and foremost, throughout your job interviews, and especially during the screening rounds, try to ask them about, hey, how does the ideal candidate look like in a job interview? Like, for example, at Apple, I recently had someone for a 30-minute interview, and the first 15 minutes of that interview was the interviewer asking them, hey, tell me, what do you want to know about this role? Which I believe it's an excellent way for a candidate to get to know best the expectations from an ideal candidate in this role. So don't feel constrained about the last 5 minutes of the conversation when you're supposed to have some questions for them, but rather be throughout your job interviews, try to seek how the ideal candidate looks like. Another way you could pitch this to your interviewer could be that something on the lines of, hey, interviewer, I read closely the job description, and in my opinion, here are the 3 competencies which I found the most relevant for this role. Am I going in the right direction? Is this what you're looking for, an ideal candidate? And, they might not, spill the beans, so to speak, with the 3 core competencies that they're most interested in, but still they would give you some insight, and at least they will appreciate that you took their interview seriously. Generally speaking, the hiring manager will for sure know those 3 key competencies. The recruiter is, 50-50, and all other interviewers might know something, but not too much about that insider info, but still it's worth asking, right? Again, so there's a lot more about that job description with just a marketing manifesto. There will be some core competencies you're going to be screened on, and not only screened on, but you're going to be ranked scored on models of behavioral competencies that are used to differentiate yourself from other candidates. Another important topic to seriously consider in these job interviews would be to read your interviewers. So interviewers, are human beings. So whenever you ask them something or whenever you present yourself in a certain way, they will send you signals. So the better you get at reading your interviewer and building your listening skills, practicing interviews essentially, the better your chances that you're also going to understand what they're actually looking for with these things. And finally, I'd like to share with you what types of misunderstanding, what are the most common misunderstandings out of those job descriptions. From someone, I'm doing this for around 8 years or 9 years now that I'm advising candidates for jobs with FANGs. First example would be on whether a role is a customer-facing or not. Many roles, for example at AWS, there's a saying, any role is a sales role. Right? So even though you're applying for a highly technical role, that role might be a customer-facing. Why is this different? Well, it makes all the difference in the world, because if it is a customer-facing, it means customer obsession will become a key competency in an ideal candidate, when in fact, if you read the job description, it might sound like something extremely technical. Right? Another major thing with these job description is with respect to the seniority of the role that you're involved. Is this a hands-on or a hands-off, or what percentage? What is the ratio between the hands-on and hands-off? And you'll be surprised how many candidates get disqualified for this specific topic. It can be as simple as you go through a final round of 5 interviews, and during 10 seconds, they ask you a quick question. Are you hands-on or hands-off PM, for instance? And you say, I'm fully hands-on. Okay. When in fact, they were looking for a hands-off, for 70% hands-off and maybe only 30% hands-on. And it's game over, even before your interview, even though you had 5 interviews, but you answer that question and you raise suspicions about, hey, you know what, this candidate cannot be a right fit because they call themselves what we're not looking for, right? So if only you had asked them, hey, is this a hands-on or hands-off role? Or, you could take a bit more caution, say I'm 50-50 or these sort of things, and you're in a far better spot. Another major topic with this job description, another major misunderstanding here is how technical the role is. And believe me when I tell you, regardless of what they say in the preferred qualifications, the basic qualifications, that can still evolve. Right, because remember that might have been for a different role that they like the job description for and which they use for this opportunity. So it's always worth investigating and remaining curious, exhibiting a bit of curiosity of how does the ideal candidate look like, because again, this can easily make the difference between success and failure in job interviews. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.